She stepped to the stand, ready to testify. But the judge cut her off with a sneer. "You're just a mouthpiece," he said, dismissing her. The courtroom laughed. Moments later, that same woman unveiled evidence that brought him to his knees. So who was really out of place before we dive into the story? Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us reach 1,000 subscribers and keeps us telling stories that matter. Thank you. Karoline Leavitt walked into the federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. At 30, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark blazer crisp but understated, a thick folder tucked under her arm. She was here to testify for Liberty Fund, a conservative charity facing accusations of financial misconduct. The room buzzed with murmurs as she approached the witness stand, eyes from the gallery scanning her. She adjusted her glasses, feeling the weight of the moment. Judge Maxwell Carter, 58, loomed above on the bench, his black robe stark against the wood paneling. His reputation as an anti-Trump crusader preceded him, and his sharp gray eyes locked onto Karoline with a glint of disdain as she began to state her name and role. White House press secretary. He cut her off. "So, you're Trump's mouthpiece," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. A ripple of chuckles spread through the courtroom. Karoline's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers curled around the worn pen in her pocket, a gift from her mother, its edges smoothed from years of use. In the gallery, Laura Bennett, a 40-year-old reporter with a notepad balanced on her knee, scribbled furiously. Catching the tension, Susan Hayes, the 45-year-old attorney for Liberty Fund, sat at the defense table. Her lips pursed as she shot a glance at her assistant, Tom Reynolds. The air felt thick, charged with Carter's authority. He leaned forward, smirking. "I hope you've got more than press releases to offer my court, Ms. Leavitt." Karoline took a slow breath, her face calm despite the sting of his words. She set her folder on the stand, the soft thud barely audible. Nobody noticed the deliberate way she aligned it, as if preparing for something bigger. Susan shifted in her seat, sensing Karoline's restraint but unsure of her next move. Laura's pen paused, her instincts telling her this wasn't just another hearing. Carter pressed on, questioning Karoline's credentials. "What makes you think you're qualified to speak on financial matters?" he asked, his tone suggesting she was out of her depth. The gallery stirred again, a few spectators nodding in agreement with his jab. Greg Walsh, a 55-year-old lobbyist and Carter ally, leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. Karoline met Carter's gaze, her voice steady. "I'm here to present the facts, Your Honor," the judge scoffed, waving a hand. "Facts from a political pawn spare us." More laughter followed, sharper this time. Susan scribbled a note, passing it to Tom, who frowned. Karoline's grip on her pen tightened, the metal cool against her palm. She thought of her mother's words. Truth doesn't need a loud voice. She didn't argue, didn't raise her tone. Instead, she opened her folder, flipping to the first page with a calm precision that went unnoticed by most. Laura leaned forward, her camera phone discreetly aimed at the stand. Something about Karoline's composure held her attention. The reporter had covered enough trials to know when a moment was about to shift. Carter, oblivious, leaned back in his chair, confident in his control. He gestured for Karoline to continue, his smirk suggesting he expected her to falter. Karoline began her testimony, outlining Liberty Fund's financial transparency. Carter interrupted again, his voice booming. "This isn't a campaign rally. Miss Leavitt, stick to what you actually know." The gallery erupted in muffled snickers. Susan's pen stopped mid-sentence, her frustration clear. Tom whispered something to her, but she shook her head, eyes fixed on Karoline. Karoline paused, her fingers brushing the folder's edge. She looked up at Carter, her expression unreadable. "May I ask a question?" "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear but soft. Carter raised an eyebrow, amused. "Go ahead, but don't waste my time." She nodded, her hand resting on the folder. "If evidence points to misconduct in this courtroom, would you allow it to be presented?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Carter's smirk faded for a split second, his fingers twitching on the gavel. The gallery fell silent, all eyes on him. Laura's camera clicked softly, capturing the moment. Carter recovered quickly, leaning forward with a forced laugh. "You think you can teach me about the law, Mrs. Leavitt?" His voice was loud, meant to dismiss her, but his eyes darted to the folder on the stand. Karoline didn't answer, her silence louder than any retort. She adjusted the pen in her pocket, her resolve hardening. Karoline Leavitt stood at the witness stand, her hands steady on the folder as Judge Maxwell Carter's gaze bore into her. The courtroom's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, and the air felt heavy with the weight of his authority. Carter, his voice sharp, pivoted from her last question, now grilling her about her White House role. "How does a press secretary know anything about financial audits?" he asked, leaning forward, his lips curling into a sneer. The gallery stirred, a few spectators nodding as if Karoline was already outmatched. She kept her face neutral, but her fingers brushed the worn pen in her pocket. A habit when pressure mounted, a memory flickered late nights at her White House desk, poring over court records. She'd stumbled across a pattern conservative groups like Liberty Fund, crushed by Carter's rulings, their appeals dismissed without reason. One case stuck with her, a small charity, bankrupted after Carter's verdict, its director in tears on the news. That was when Karoline started digging, driven by a need to stop him. Back in the courtroom, Carter pressed harder. "Your job is to spin stories, Ms. Leavitt, not testify in my court." His words landed like a slap, and muffled laughter rippled through the room. Susan Hayes, at the defense table, whispered to her assistant, Tom Reynolds. "He's railroading her." Tom, 27, nodded, his jaw tight, scribbling notes. Karoline felt the isolation, like she was standing alone in a storm. She wasn't just defending Liberty Fund, she was fighting for every group Carter had buried. Susan's eyes met hers, urging restraint. Karoline took a breath, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. "Don't let anyone steal your truth." She straightened, her voice clear. "Your Honor, may I present evidence related to Liberty Fund's case?" Carter waved her off, his hand slicing the air. "Not unless it's relevant, and I doubt you'd know what that means." The gallery chuckled again, and Greg Walsh, the lobbyist in the back, leaned toward his colleague, muttering with a smirk. Laura Bennett, the reporter, sat in the third row, her pen moving fast. She sensed the unfairness, the way Carter was stacking the deck. Her phone buzzed with notifications she'd tweeted about the exchange, and replies were already pouring in. Judge Carter just called the White House press secretary a story spinner. "Is this justice?" she wrote. Hitting send, the post spread, sparking outrage among some, amusement among others. Karoline didn't see the tweets. Her focus stayed on Carter, whose confidence seemed unshakable. He shifted topics, demanding details about her involvement with Liberty Fund. "Are you their accountant now?" he asked, his tone mocking. Susan scribbled another note, passing it to Tom, who shook his head. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Karoline's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice even. "I'm here to clarify their financial records, Your Honor." Carter leaned back, folding his arms. "Clarify you're here to push a narrative." His words drew more nods from the gallery, and Greg Walsh's grin widened. Karoline's hand tightened on the folder, its edges worn from weeks of preparation. She thought of the charity director's face, the one who'd lost everything. That was why she was here, not for politics, but for fairness. She tried again, her tone measured. If I could show the court documented proof, would that be allowed? Carter's eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming on the bench. Proof from you, I'll decide what's admissible. Miss Leavitt. His dismissal was final, his voice loud enough to silence any follow-up. Susan's shoulders slumped, and Tom whispered, "He's not letting her breathe." Laura's fingers flew across her phone. Posting another update, Carter shuts down Leavitt's request to present evidence. What's he hiding? The tweet gained traction, shared by accounts Karoline would never see. In the gallery, a few spectators shifted uncomfortably, sensing the judge's bias. But Greg Walsh leaned forward, whispering to his colleague, "She's done. No way she gets past him." Karoline adjusted her glasses, her expression calm despite the sting of Carter's words. She flipped a page in her folder, her movements deliberate. The gallery didn't notice, but Susan did, her eyes narrowing slightly. Karoline wasn't backing down. She looked at Carter, her voice steady. "I understand. Your Honor, I'll wait for your permission." Carter smirked, thinking he'd won the round. He moved on, calling for the next point in the case, but Karoline's calm rattled him. Though he hid it behind a sip of water, Laura caught the moment, her camera snapping a photo of Karoline's poised figure against Carter's looming presence. The reporter's gut told her something was coming. As Carter droned on, Karoline's hand rested on the folder, her thumb tracing its edge. She knew what was inside: bank records, emails, a recording, evidence that could change everything. She just needed the right moment. "In the back," Greg Walsh muttered to his colleague. "She's not getting out of this." Karoline's eyes flicked toward him, steady and unflinching. As if she heard every word, Karoline Leavitt stood at the witness stand, her hands resting lightly on the folder, the courtroom's silence pressing against her. Judge Maxwell Carter leaned forward on his bench, his gray eyes narrowing as he fired another question. What exactly does a press secretary know about legal proceedings? Ms. Leavitt. His voice carried a mocking edge, designed to make her squirm. The gallery watched, some leaning forward, others whispering. Karoline's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression steady, her fingers brushing the worn pen in her pocket. Carter's questions had veered off topic, probing her political ties instead of Liberty Fund's finances. He was baiting her, trying to paint her as a partisan hack. Susan Hayes, at the defense table, scribbled a note, her brow furrowed. Her assistant, Tom Reynolds, leaned over, reading it, his jaw tight. In the third row, Laura Bennett's pen scratched across her notepad, capturing every word. The reporter's phone buzzed with notifications. Her tweets about Carter's bias were gaining traction. Karoline took a slow breath, her mother's words echoing. "Truth doesn't need permission." She looked up at Carter, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, if there's evidence of misconduct in this courtroom, may I present it?" The question cut through the room like a blade. Carter froze, his gavel hovering midair. For a split second, his eyes widened, a flicker of unease betraying his composure. Then he laughed, a harsh, forced sound. "Misconduct, you're out of line. Ms. Leavitt." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Susan's hand gripped Tom's arm, her eyes wide with surprise. Greg Walsh, the lobbyist in the back, shifted in his seat, muttering to his colleague, his frown deepening. Some spectators smirked, thinking Karoline had overplayed her hand. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Laura's camera clicked softly, capturing Carter's strained smile. She typed a quick tweet. "Leavitt just challenged Judge Carter's integrity. bold or reckless. Carter slammed his gavel, the sound sharp. "I won't tolerate disrespect in my court," he snapped, his voice booming. "One more stunt like that, and you're in contempt." His finger pointed at Karoline, but his eyes darted to the folder on her stand, as if it held something he feared. Karoline didn't blink. "I understand, Your Honor," she said, her tone even, almost too polite. She adjusted her glasses, her movements deliberate, and opened her folder to a marked page. Susan whispered to Tom, "She's pushing him too far." Tom shook his head, his eyes fixed on Karoline. "Or she's on to something," he murmured. The gallery's whispers grew louder, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Greg Walsh leaned forward, his arms crossed, muttering. "She's digging her own grave." But Karoline's calm unnerved him, her silence louder than any outburst. Carter regained control, his voice cold. "Stick to the case. Ms. Leavitt, I'm not here for your theories." He gestured for her to continue, expecting her to back down. Karoline nodded, her fingers flipping through her folder. She began reading Liberty Fund's financial summary, her voice clear, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew the evidence inside bank records, emails. A recording could unravel Carter's authority. She just needed an opening. Laura's phone buzzed again, her tweet now trending with a hashtag "Who Runs the Court." Comments flooded in, some calling Karoline a hero, others a troublemaker. She glanced at the gallery, noticing a few spectators checking their phones, their expressions shifting. The mood in the room was changing, the weight of Karoline's question lingering. Carter interrupted her again, his tone sharp. "Enough about your numbers. Tell me why Liberty Fund deserves my time." His words were meant to dismiss her, but his hands fidgeted with a pen, betraying his unease. Karoline paused, her eyes meeting his. "Because the truth matters, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady. The gallery fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Susan's pen stopped, her eyes locked on Karoline. Tom leaned forward, his notepad forgotten. Laura's fingers hovered over her phone, sensing a shift. Greg Walsh shifted uncomfortably, his whisper to his colleague cut short. Carter's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening on the gavel. He opened his mouth to retort, but Karoline spoke first. "May I continue with the evidence?" she asked, her hand resting on the folder. Carter's jaw clenched, his voice low. "Proceed, but watch your step." He leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. Karoline nodded, her heart pounding but her face calm. She knew she'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. The folder felt heavier now, its contents a ticking clock. Laura snapped another photo, her tweet already forming Leavitt's "not backing down." "What's in that folder?" As Karoline resumed her testimony, the gallery buzzed with tension. Spectators exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others leaning closer. Susan whispered to Tom, "She's playing with fire." Tom nodded, but his eyes stayed on Karoline, a faint smile forming. In the back, Greg Walsh checked his phone, his face darkening as he saw the trending hashtag. The courtroom felt alive, every word a spark. Karoline's voice carried on, steady and precise, but her mind raced. She'd planted the seed, and Carter's reaction told her she'd hit a nerve. The next move was his, but she was ready. The pen in her pocket felt warm, a reminder of why she was here. As she closed her folder, her eyes flicked to Carter, who was watching her like a hawk. The game had changed, and he knew it. Karoline Leavitt stepped into her White House office, the hum of fluorescent lights greeting her. The door clicked shut, muffling the chatter of staffers in the hall. Her desk was cluttered with memos, but her eyes fell on her phone, its screen glowing with notifications. Laura Bennett's tweet about her courtroom clash with Judge Maxwell Carter had exploded on X. racking up thousands of shares. Karoline scrolled, her stomach sinking. Troublemaker. One comment read, "Just another political hack." Said another. She set the phone down, her hand trembling slightly. In the hallway, a colleague, usually chatty, passed her with a curt nod. Avoiding eye contact, Karoline felt the sting of isolation, like a cold draft in the room. She sat at her desk, flipping on the TV. A news anchor was replaying her courtroom moment. Her question to Carter looped with a mocking headline, "Press Secretary oversteps in court." Carter himself appeared in a clip, his face stern. "Miss Leavitt's antics were a desperate stunt," he said, his voice smooth, authoritative. The anchor smirked, cutting to a pundit who called her a pawn in a political game. Karoline muted the TV, her fingers brushing the worn pen in her pocket. She thought of the charity director she'd seen on the news a year ago. Broken by Carter's ruling, that memory had driven her to dig into his cases, to fight for Liberty Fund. Now, doubt crept in. Had she pushed too far? Her phone rang. Susan Hayes' name on the screen. Karoline answered, bracing herself. "Karoline, what were you thinking?" Susan's voice was tense. "Challenging Carter like that, he's doubling down. This could tank our case." Susan paused, her tone softening. "I know you meant well, but we're in deep now." Karoline gripped the phone, her jaw tight. "I had to say something." "Susan, he's not playing fair." Susan sighed. "Fair or not, you've given his allies ammunition. Be careful." After hanging up, Karoline stared at her desk, the folder from court still unopened. Tom Reynolds had texted earlier. His message brief but supportive, "You did the right thing. Hang in there." But even Tom had warned her about Greg Walsh, Carter's lobbyist friend, who was rallying support for the judge. Karoline opened her laptop, finding an anonymous email in her inbox. "Back off, or you'll regret it." It read, no signature. Her pulse quickened, but she deleted it, refusing to let fear take hold. She stood, pacing the small office, the weight of the backlash pressed down her colleagues' distance, the media's scorn, the threat. She glanced at the TV, now showing Carter shaking hands with supporters outside the courthouse. His confidence, his power, felt suffocating. Karoline sat back down, her hands clenching. Had she miscalculated? The folder on her desk seemed to taunt her, its contents evidence she hadn't yet shared feeling heavier by the minute. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Laura Bennett. "Got a tip from someone who knows Carter's dealings. Can we meet Karoline's?" Breath caught. She typed back, where and when. Laura replied instantly, "Corner Cafe, 7 p.m. Come alone." Karoline leaned back, her mind racing. A tip about Carter could change everything, or it could be a trap. She thought of the person she'd helped a year ago, a banker who'd fought Carter's rulings. Could this be connected? She walked to the office window, looking out at D.C.'s gray skyline. The city felt vast, indifferent. Her reflection stared back, tired but resolute. She pulled the pen from her pocket, rolling it between her fingers. Her mother's words came back. "Truth is your anchor." Stopping now would mean betraying that. Betraying herself. She tucked the pen away, her decision made. Karoline grabbed her coat, slipping out of the office. The hallway was quieter now, but a junior staffer glanced at her, then quickly looked away. She kept walking, her steps firm. Outside, the air was cool, the streets busy with evening commuters. She headed toward the cafe, her folder tucked under her arm. Laura's message had sparked a flicker of hope, but doubt lingered. Was this source real, or was she walking into another ambush at the cafe? Karoline paused outside, scanning the street. No one seemed to follow. She pushed the door open. the bell jingling softly. Laura sat in a corner booth, her notepad out, her face serious. Karoline took a seat, her folder on the table. "What's the tip?" she asked, her voice low. Laura leaned in, her eyes scanning the room. "Someone's got dirt on Carter bank records. Maybe more. They'll only talk to you." Karoline's fingers tightened on the folder. This could be the break she needed. But the risks were higher now. She thought of the anonymous email, the media's attacks, Susan's warning. Her eyes fell on the pen in her pocket, its worn surface catching the cafe's dim light. "If I stop now," she said softly, almost to herself, "I'm not me anymore." Laura tilted her head, waiting. Karoline looked up, her voice steady. "Tell them I'm in." Karoline Leavitt pushed open the door to a small D.C. cafe, the bell jingling softly as she stepped inside. The air smelled of roasted coffee, and the low hum of conversation filled the space. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Laura Bennett, who sat in a corner booth, her notepad open. Laura waved her over, her expression serious. Karoline adjusted her coat, the folder from court still tucked under her arm, and slid into the seat across from the reporter. Her heart raced, the anonymous email threat from earlier still fresh in her mind. Laura leaned forward, her voice low. "Thanks for coming. I've got someone you need to meet." She gestured to a man approaching the table, his gray hair neatly combed, his suit slightly wrinkled. "This is Daniel Foster," Laura said. Daniel, 52, extended a hand, his grip firm but his eyes wary. Karoline shook it, her brow furrowing. "Have we met?" she asked, her voice cautious. Daniel sat down, glancing around the cafe. "Not exactly," he said, his tone measured. "But you helped me last year. I filed a complaint against a ruling by Judge Carter. You walked me through the process, made sure it got to the right people." Karoline's memory clicked a banker, desperate, whose organization had been crushed by Carter's verdict. She nodded, her guard still up. "What's this about?" Daniel pulled a USB drive from his pocket, sliding it across the table. "This is everything I've got on Carter," he said. "Bank records, emails, transfers, proof he's been taking money to sway his rulings." Karoline's breath caught, her fingers hovering over the drive. She looked at Laura, who nodded. "He reached out to me after my tweets." Laura said you're the only one he trusts. Karoline picked up the USB, its weight slight but heavy with possibility. Her mind flashed to the courtroom, Carter's smirk, the gallery's laughter. This could be the key to exposing him, but doubt gnawed at her after the media backlash. The threats. Could she risk more? She tucked the drive into her pocket, next to her worn pen, and met Daniel's gaze. "Why now?" she asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Carter destroyed the group I worked for, a small nonprofit. He buried us with a ruling that made no sense. I started digging, found his trails, been waiting for someone like you to show up." His voice was steady, but his fingers tapped the table, betraying his nerves. Karoline nodded, recognizing the same resolve she felt. She thought of her mother's words. "Truth finds a way." Laura's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. "Walsh is on TV again," she said, turning the screen. Greg Walsh, Carter's lobbyist ally, was mid-rant, accusing Karoline of fabricating lies to save Liberty Fund. "She's desperate," Walsh said, his eyes cold. Karoline's stomach twisted, but she pushed it aside, focusing on Daniel. "How solid is this evidence?" she asked. "Solid enough to sink him," Daniel said, his voice firm. "But you'll need to move fast. Carter's got people watching." Karoline's mind raced, the anonymous email flashing in her memory. She pulled out her phone, texting Susan Hayes. "Need to talk. Got something big." Susan replied instantly, "Be careful. Carter's allies are circling." Karoline slipped the phone back into her pocket, her decision forming. She looked at Laura. "Can you keep this quiet until I'm ready?" Laura nodded, her pen poised. "I'm with you. But you're playing with fire." Karoline turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I'll make sure this gets used right." As she stood to leave, her phone rang. Tom Reynolds. She answered, stepping toward the cafe's window. "Karoline, you okay?" Tom's voice was urgent. "Walsh's people are pushing hard to discredit you. Susan's worried this could hurt the case." Karoline glanced at the USB in her pocket, her resolve hardening. "Tell Susan I've got something that'll change the game," she said. Tom paused, then chuckled. "That's the Karoline I know." She hung up, looking out at the Sights street, where rain had started to fall, streaking the glass. The cafe's warmth contrasted with the chill outside, mirroring her mix of hope and fear. She thought of the banker she'd helped, now sitting across from her, risking everything. This was bigger than Liberty Fund. It was about stopping a man who'd twisted justice for too long. Karoline turned back to Daniel, who was watching her closely. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, her hand brushing the USB. "I've been ready since I saw what he did to people like you." Laura closed her notepad, her eyes sharp. "I'll wait for your signal," she said. Standing to leave, Karoline stayed a moment longer, her fingers tracing the pen's worn edges. The weight of the USB felt like a promise, a chance to turn the tide. She stepped outside, the rain cool on her face, and headed back to her office. The city moved around her, unaware of the storm she was about to unleash. As she walked, her phone buzzed with another tweet from Laura. Already trending, "Leavitt's got something up her sleeve. Carter should be nervous." Karoline didn't see it, but she felt the shift, the momentum building. She whispered to herself, looking at the rain-slicked street, "If this is the truth, it's going to change everything." Her steps quickened, the folder under her arm heavier with purpose. Karoline Leavitt stepped into the federal courtroom, the USB drive a small, heavy weight in her pocket. The room was already buzzing, spectators settling into their seats as the next session of the Liberty Fund case began. She took her place at the witness stand, her folder open, her face composed despite the sleepless night. Judge Maxwell Carter sat high on the bench, his black robe pristine, his expression one of unshakable confidence. He nodded for the proceedings to continue, his eyes skimming over Karoline as if she were an afterthought. Susan Hayes, at the defense table, presented another argument, citing Liberty Fund's clean financial records. Carter cut her off, his voice sharp. "I've heard enough about your numbers. Miss Hayes, move on." Susan's jaw tightened, but she complied, glancing at Karoline with a mix of worry and hope. Tom Reynolds, her assistant, scribbled notes, his eyes darting to Karoline. In the gallery, Laura Bennett adjusted her phone, ready to record, her latest tweet about Karoline still trending. During a brief recess, Karoline pulled Susan and Tom aside in a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. The marble walls echoed with distant footsteps. She held up the USB, her voice low. "This has everything: emails, bank records, a recording. Carter's been taking money to rig his rulings." Susan's eyes widened, her hand gripping her briefcase. "Karoline, if you use this, Carter will come after you hard. You could lose your job, your reputation. We might still win the case without it." Her tone was urgent, almost pleading. Tom leaned in, his voice steady. "But if you don't use it, who's going to stop him? You've got the chance to take him down." Karoline's fingers tightened around the USB, her mind racing. She thought of the anonymous email threat, the media's attacks, her colleagues' cold shoulders. Staying silent would be safer, but it would mean letting Carter's corruption fester. Her mother's words cut through the noise. Truth is something no one can steal. She met Susan's gaze. "I'm doing this," she said, her voice firm. Susan sighed, nodding reluctantly. "Then we're with you. But be ready for the fallout." Tom grinned, giving her a quick nod. Karoline slipped the USB back into her pocket, next to her worn pen, and headed back to the courtroom, her steps purposeful. The session resumed, and Carter called Karoline to continue her testimony. He leaned back, arms crossed, his smirk suggesting he expected more of her stunts. Karoline stood, her folder open, and cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I'd like to present additional evidence," she said, her voice clear. Carter raised an eyebrow, amused. "Additional? This better be worth my time." "Ms. Leavitt," the gallery murmured, some spectators rolling their eyes, others leaning forward. Karoline connected the USB to a laptop provided by the court, her movements steady despite her racing pulse. She opened a file, projecting it onto a screen. "These are emails," she said, her voice unwavering, showing payments from a Liberty Fund account to a personal account tied to Judge Carter. The room went still. Carter's smirk vanished, his hands gripping the bench. Susan sat up straighter, her eyes locked on the screen. Tom's pen stopped mid-note. Karoline read aloud, her voice carrying. "This email, dated last year, confirms a transfer of $50,000, with a note, for favorable consideration. The recipient's account matches records linked to you. Your Honor." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Laura's phone was up, recording every second, her fingers already typing a tweet. Greg Walsh, in the back, stood abruptly, his face red. "This is outrageous," he shouted, pointing at Karoline. "She's fabricating this." Carter banged his gavel, his voice sharp but unsteady. "Order, sit down. Mr. Butts." "Walsh?" His eyes darted to the screen, then to Karoline, a bead of sweat visible on his brow. The gallery buzzed, spectators whispering, some pulling out phones to check X, where Laura's live updates were spreading like wildfire. Susan whispered to Tom, "She's got him rattled." Tom nodded, his eyes wide. Karoline didn't pause. She opened another file, a bank statement, and pointed to highlighted transactions. "These show consistent payments over 2 years, all tied to cases you ruled on." "Your Honor." The room's tension was palpable, every word tightening the noose. Carter's fingers twitched, his face paling. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You're treading dangerous ground. Ms. Leavitt, these could be forgeries." Karoline met his gaze, unflinching. "Then let the court verify them," she said, her tone calm but firm. She reached for the laptop, her hands steady. "There's one more piece of evidence." The gallery held its breath as she clicked a file. "This is a recording," she said, pressing play. Carter's voice filled the room, smug and clear. "The fund's case is handled. They paid up. So they're clear." The words echoed, undeniable. Every eye turned to Karoline, then to Carter, whose face drained of color. He gripped the gavel, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with realization. He'd walked into her trap, and there was no way out. Laura's camera caught it all. Her tweet already drafted. Carter's own voice betrays him. Leavitt's evidence is undeniable. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Maxwell Carter's voice echoed from the recording, admitting he'd taken money to fix cases. Karoline Leavitt stood at the witness stand, her posture straight, her eyes locked on the screen displaying the damning evidence. The gallery held its breath, every spectator frozen, phones forgotten in their hands. Carter's face twisted, his fist slamming the bench. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, his voice cracking, spittle flying. His gavel trembled in his hand, but no one listened. Karoline didn't flinch, her hands steady on the folder. She'd played the recording, read the emails, shown the bank records. The truth was out, and Carter's authority was crumbling. Susan Hayes leapt to her feet at the defense table, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, this demands an immediate mistrial." She held up a stack of papers, backup documents Tom Reynolds had prepared. Tom, his face flushed with excitement, passed her another file, his eyes darting to Karoline with a grin. The gallery erupted in whispers, a wave of shock rolling through the room. Laura Bennett, in the third row, held her phone steady, live streaming the chaos. Her fingers flew across the screen, posting to X Carter exposed by Leavitt's evidence. Court in uproar. The hashtag Who Runs the Court surged, trending nationwide. Spectators pulled out their phones, some recording, others tweeting. The room alive with the hum of a story breaking wide open. Carter's eyes darted wildly, his composure gone. He pointed at Karoline, his voice hoarse. "You'll pay for this, Ms. Leavitt." These are lies, but his words drowned in the growing noise. Greg Walsh, the lobbyist in the back, stood frozen, his face pale. He muttered something to his colleague, but his ally shook his head, edging away. Walsh's shoulders slumped, and he sank back into his seat, his influence evaporating. Susan pressed forward, her voice cutting through. "We have corroborating evidence. Your Honor, this court must address these allegations." Carter opened his mouth to retort, but a commotion at the courtroom door stopped him. Two figures strode in. FBI agents Mark Sullivan, 50, his suit crisp, and Rachel Kim, 38, her badge glinting. Sullivan's voice was calm but firm. "Judge Maxwell Carter, you're under arrest for bribery and judicial misconduct." The room gasped. A collective intake of breath. Carter's gavel fell from his hand. Clattering on the bench, he stood, his face ashen, his hands shaking. "This is a setup," he yelled, turning to Walsh. "Greg, do something." But Walsh avoided his gaze, slipping toward the exit. His head bowed. The gallery watched, some spectators shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. Laura's camera caught Walsh's retreat. Her tweet already forming Carter's ally abandons him. Justice moves fast. Karoline stepped back from the stand, her folder closed, her work done. She felt a rush of relief, her chest loosening for the first time in days. She'd turned their scorn into accountability, and the weight of it settled into quiet pride. Susan rushed over, pulling her into a quick hug. "You did it?" she whispered, her voice thick. Tom clapped Karoline on the shoulder, his grin wide. "Knew you had it in you," he said, his voice loud enough for nearby spectators to hear. Rachel Kim approached the bench, her handcuffs ready. Carter backed away, his hands raised. "You can't do this, I'm a federal judge." Sullivan stepped forward, his tone even. "Not anymore." He nodded to Kim, who cuffed Carter's wrists, the metal clicking sharply. The gallery's whispers turned to cheers, sporadic at first, then louder. A wave of support for Karoline. A woman in the back stood, clapping, and others joined, the sound filling the room. Laura's live stream captured it all, her phone shaking slightly as she zoomed in on Carter's stunned face. She leaned toward a man sitting beside her, Daniel Foster, the banker who'd given Karoline the USB. "You tipped off the FBI, didn't you?" she asked, her voice low. Daniel nodded, his eyes on Karoline. "Sent them copies the day I met her. Knew she'd make it count." Laura's fingers typed furiously. Adding the twist to her feed, Leavitt's evidence was a coordinated strike. FBI had it all along. Carter stumbled as Kim led him down from the bench, his robe catching on the edge. He glanced back at the empty chair, his face a mix of rage and disbelief. The gallery watched, some shaking their heads, others filming the moment. Susan handed her files to Tom, who was already organizing them for the next steps. "This changes everything," she said, her voice steady but awed. Karoline nodded, her hand brushing the pen in her pocket. Her mother's words a quiet anchor. The courtroom doors swung open, and Carter was led out, his head low, the cheers fading into murmurs. Karoline gathered her folder, her movements calm. She caught Laura's eye, giving a small nod. The reporter smiled, her phone still recording. The gallery began to disperse, but many lingered, talking in hushed tones, their phones buzzing with updates. Tom leaned toward Susan, whispering, "She's a hero now." Susan nodded, watching Karoline. She always was. Karoline stepped into the hallway, the noise of the courtroom fading. She pulled out her phone, seeing Laura's latest tweet today. A press secretary made the system bow. The words hit her, but she didn't linger. She tucked the phone away, her eyes on the courthouse exit, where reporters were already gathering. She knew the storm wasn't over, but for now, the truth had won. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the federal courthouse. The D.C. air cool and damp with a light rain. She pulled her coat tighter, her worn pen tucked in her pocket. Its familiar weight a quiet reminder of her mother's strength. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, but Karoline raised a hand, her voice firm. "No interviews today." She caught Laura Bennett's eye in the crowd and nodded. Laura, phone in hand, smiled and typed a quick tweet. Leavitt walks away, letting her actions speak. Karoline moved through the reporters, her folder under her arm, the chaos of the courtroom behind her. She'd exposed Judge Maxwell Carter, and the FBI had taken him away, his empty chair a symbol of accountability. Her phone buzzed with notifications, Laura's posts, trending hashtags, messages of support, but she silenced it. Needing a moment of quiet, she headed toward a familiar cafe a few blocks away, the rain pattering on her umbrella, the city's rhythm steady around her. Inside the cafe, the smell of coffee grounded her. Daniel Foster sat at a corner table, his gray hair catching the light. He stood as she approached, his handshake warm. "You did it, Karoline," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. She slid into the seat across from him, setting her folder down. "We did it," she corrected, her tone soft but sure. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes bright. "I'm working with other groups now. Small ones like mine was. Your courage lit a fire." Karoline's lips curved into a small smile, her fingers brushing the pen in her pocket. She didn't want fame, just to keep doing what was right, keep fighting. "Daniel," she said, "that's what matters." He nodded, pulling out a notebook filled with names of organizations facing unfair rulings. "Because of you, they've got a shot," he said, his voice steady. The cafe door jingled, and Laura slipped in, her notepad tucked away. She joined them, her phone buzzing with updates. "You're trending everywhere," she said, showing Karoline a post on X, a young woman, inspired by Karoline, vowing to speak out against corruption in her town. "People are listening," Laura added, her eyes sharp. Karoline glanced at the screen, then handed it back. "Good," she said simply. "Let them act." She thought of Susan Hayes and Tom Reynolds, who'd texted her earlier. They were back at their office, drafting plans for a legal fund named after her Leavitt Fund. Tom had called it, half joking but serious about its mission to help groups like Liberty Fund. Karoline hadn't responded yet, but the idea warmed her. Her fight wasn't just for one case, it was a spark for others. Outside, the rain slowed, and Karoline stood to leave. Daniel shook her hand again, his grip firm. "You ever need me, I'm here," he said. She nodded, slipping her folder under her arm. Laura walked her to the door, her voice low. "I told you Carter should have been nervous." Karoline chuckled. The first real laugh in days. "Justice doesn't need fancy words," she said, stepping into the drizzle. The street was busy, commuters hurrying past, unaware of the storm she'd unleashed. Karoline paused to tie her shoe, the laces wet from the rain. As she straightened, she noticed a young White House intern across the street, clutching a notebook, staring at her. The intern, maybe 22, gave a shy wave, then jotted something down, her pen moving quickly. Karoline recognized the look determination, the kind she'd felt years ago. She started walking toward the White House, her steps light despite the wet pavement. The rain stopped, and a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, warming her face. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it, her focus on the path ahead. She thought of her mother, the pen, the charity director whose defeat had set her on this course. One action, one truth, had shifted everything. At a crosswalk, she glanced back. The intern was still there, now talking to a colleague, pointing in Karoline's direction. The young woman's notebook was open, her pen poised, as if ready to carry the torch. Karoline's chest tightened with quiet pride, not for the headlines, but for the ripple she'd started. She turned, her umbrella folded, and kept walking. The White House looming in the distance. Laura's final tweet of the day popped up on screens across the city. Karoline Leavitt showed us one small act can change the world. Karoline didn't see it, but as she reached the White House gates, she smiled. The sunlight steady now. She knew the fight wasn't over. But for today, truth had won, and others would carry it forward. Her pen rested quietly in her pocket, but its truth had shaken a courtroom. Sometimes, the smallest voice carries the heaviest weight, not because it shouts, but because it refuses to stay silent. What truths are we holding, waiting for the right moment to speak? If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, or just a pause, subscribe to Crossfire Justice for more stories that echo long after they end. Thank you for watching.